Blessed are the forgetful, for they get the better even of their blunders.
It's only a movie.
Wake yourself up!
It's only a movie.
Totally American.
It's only a movie.
My whole body's just a quivering with cleanness.
Totally American.
This is the Miscellaneous Film Fest podcast.
Hello.
Yay! And right now we're doing movies close to my heart with Christen Kimbell. It's kind of a get-to-know-you thing, starting out with Kristen's top 5 movies or movies close to her heart.
Yeah.
5. What was your process in picking these 5 movies? I imagine there were more than 5. And these aren't your favorite, like the ultimate list, but...
Yeah, this is much more just movies that mean something really intensely to me. And since most of my time is spent being a writer, this is movies that attracted me as a writer for good and bad. I mean, there's flaws in pretty much every one of them, I think. But the flaws are part of what I love about them, actually. And it's what makes me watch them 20,000 times because I'm trying to extract what I wish they'd done and then turn it around and put it in my own work.
What kind of narratives are you drawn to? Like more personal or more plot driven?
This gets tricky because it depends on whatever project is consuming my brain.
Okay. So
since for the last decade now, I've been trying to get a 90s film off the ground and now a 90s game.
That's got to be an interesting transition, moving from writing for a film with a limited runtime to a game that I imagine is very expansive.
Surprisingly similar.
Oh, really?
It's a little bit like moving from films to plays, except that plays also have usually a fairly limited runtime. Mm-hmm. But it's the format. There is no standardization. In writing games, there's no formula to follow, whereas with film, it's all formula. But the layout of it is very similar, weirdly enough.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah, and there's a lot of things I learned in post-production and film that it's just straight up game stuff. CGI effects is pretty much just game stuff anyway. So.
Oh yeah. It's probably all CGI. Does that lend itself, at least when you're writing? I used to do a lot with radio theater, and with that, it all being read aloud, you can write whatever you want and say whatever you want is happening. Mm-hmm. Is there a similar kind of freedom when writing for a game where literally everything's going to be CGI? Oh, good.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
And so it's wonderful.
You don't have to worry about actors doing it right. The actors will be animated to do it right.
Well, that's actually one of my favorite parts of filmmaking is the actors. For a side conversation that I'll just kind of sum up real quick, which is actors... you make somebody up out of thin air, right? And then you go and find somebody who can personify that. Mm-hmm. And then they put on the clothes, they do the makeup, they walk around and they quote your lines. And it's like watching somebody fictional become real.
Yeah.
And it was always really kick-ass to go through that process with actors. And that's the one part that I miss the most, honestly, trading over to games, is that I'm no longer collaborating. It's mostly just a straightforward thing. But yeah, on the plus side, film is full of censorship. It is nothing but censorship. Every conversation you ever have with anybody is, how are you going to sell this?
Oh, yeah.
Who can you sell it to? And so it's constantly a question of, will that sell? Are you sure you want to say that? Which is exhausting.
Right, especially if you have something sincere that you were trying to get out and trying to express, something you've crafted, and everything's on purpose, and they stop and say, can you unpurpose some of this and make it more convenient for us?
Yeah, which I would be fine with if it was improving the thing, but it's not about improving the thing. It's about making it more palatable, this is how we wind up with so many movies that are just kind of there with nothing really in them, for better or worse.
Oh, that sucks.
And they go through that same process. So on the other end of it, I've been a little blown away and kind of overwhelmed that there is no restriction in games. You can do whatever you want. No problem.
Really?
And you can put it up on Steam as long as you meet their specs. That's it.
Okay. Oh, is there a difference between... Now, here's where my ignorance comes out about not being a gamer.
Sure.
Is there a difference when you're possibly making a game for mass market, for Xbox, versus Steam? Is Steam more an open forum?
This is a really good question. It's more in the sense of so... I'm still learning in terms of how games work. Okay. And my understanding is you can get a distribution company to get your game out there, and they will probably have a hand in what it says, but it's not necessary. Like, there are plenty of very famous examples in games where it's been one or two people just making exactly what they want to make. They put it out there and it's accessible just as much as any other game. Whereas if you're making a film, and I watch this process happen in the indie sphere over and over and over again, you make the film, you make it exactly the way you want it. And then if you're very, very, very lucky, you'll be able to maybe get it up on Amazon streaming, but it'll get buried.
Right.
So 30 people will watch it. They'll be looking for things to make fun of. There you go. Now you no longer have any shot at a career. And so, yeah, it's a hard life for an indie filmmaker in that it costs so much to get a film made.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you next. But before you were doing this video game project, what was it like working in the indie sphere? The indie sphere. Tell us about the films. Tell us about some of the films you did work on, because now's the time to put the names out. I mean, hopefully draw attention to them. We should do a film fest of just movies you worked on.
I would love to do a film fest of movies that are made here, because I actually think there's some really incredible work made here that doesn't get any traction at all because it doesn't fit in. There's nowhere to put it. So I'd love to be able to do that at some point. There are films here that matter to me very deeply, and it's been cool to work with the people who made them. But it's all been here. I never worked on anything big or impressive. There's a really great punk screenwriter here, Randall Jansen. The biggest thing that he did was a couple of Tales from the Crypt episodes, which I fucking love. Mark of Zorro was his other one with Antonio Banderas.
Oh, really?
Randall Jansen is the name of the guy. He lives here, and he is like the nicest human alive. So like, you can usually take his screenwriting classes for free. He'll give you a hand. Like,
really?
He's super supportive. He used to do like punk films way back in the day. And he worked with Penelope Spheres, who did Wayne's World a lot. So,
oh wow! That's
so
really cool.
they're films from very, very early, like the late 70s, early 80s, when punk was new. Super fucking ridiculous and fascinating and a lot of fun.
I'm gonna have to dig up.
But yeah, like,
I'll go on Letterboxd and find his filmography. Start going through that. The
plus side that I found when making films here is like there are a lot of hidden people like that here, where they got tired of the sort of LA, everybody's trying to get ahead kind of vibe, and they just sort of liked the more laid back Portland, everybody's just making what's fun kind of a vibe. So if you dig, they're usually pretty easy to find, those guys.
Okay.
J.J. Abrams' prop master was around here for a long time, and I kept stealing some of his props so I didn't have to pay anything.
What?
For mine. This was like, I don't think he's still around. This was like 2009, 10, 11, 12, which is what I was about to say a second ago. Like, I would produce for a lot of people. Somebody would hand me a script, and I'd be like, holy shit, this is so fucking good. And this is so much better than anything that I can make. And then I'd always go through a process of like, I kind of want to get the script from them and shoot it on my own. And then like, well, you know, if you're a good producer, you sit down with them and you kind of feel out like what their vision is. And if their script is good, usually they have a really solid idea of what they want to do, and they just lack the resources. So I did that for a couple of people, and it was very cool to watch their careers take off. But
that's awesome. Did you ever have that experience as a writer, finding a producer who had a similar enthusiasm or similar encouragement for you?
That was part of what burned me out finally, was that I was writing, directing, and producing all together while still holding down a full-time job.
Oh, wow.
It was too much, but I kept up the pace for about 15 years till I wrecked my health doing it. And then it's like, well, I could continue to hurt myself and still not get anywhere, or I could like make one final feature film on an iPhone and call it good. So I did, and that was, of course, early 2020, so I made an iPhone film in the middle of the pandemic.
What was it called?
23 short films about the end of the world. And I shot it with actors who I'd met all the way up and down the West Coast while I was trying to get bigger features made.
That sounds awesome.
All incredible actors who do not get nearly enough work. And because of the pandemic, they were out of work.
Right.
So I was writing a lot of monologues, and they would just speak monologues to the camera, and I kind of built a narrative out of the monologues. It's a weird little movie, but I'm kind of surprised how much I got away with. It's like $500 for the full thing, and it feels like a big production. So,
wow.
But I did the whole thing. I did sound, set design, lighting, camera.
Yeah. Yeah.
directing and writing. So yeah, it's got flaws for that reason. But
Well, I mean, it's like Sebastian in The Little Mermaid said, if you want something done right, you have to do it yourself.
you've got to do it yourself. Yeah, I could usually run them pretty well. At least when I was here. I don't know if this is still true in the Portland area, but for the 10-ish years that I was making movies around here, it wasn't hard to find volunteer people who were insanely talented.
Oh, really?
Insanely, and far too modest about it. So it was usually fairly easy.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, the rest of the time, my crews here were pretty solid, pretty great.
That's awesome.
Yeah, not the case in Seattle, not the case in LA.
Oh, no.
They want money, and fair enough.
Right,
They're making
right.
a living at it. But yeah, I got lucky and made quite a bit of stuff here just because people were like, oh yeah, that sounds cool. Sure, I'll show up.
Yeah,
And they wouldn't even ask if you were feeding them.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
So the 5 movies you chose for this, we called it Movies Close to Your Heart,
Yeah.
are 2017's I, Tonya, directed by Craig Gillespie, 2004's Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind by Michael Gondry, 1955's Night of the Hunter by Charles Laughton.
That's such a long conversation we're going to have. I love
it's
that
gonna be
movie
great.
so much.
I was so excited to find out that it was the Charles Laughton who was
the
famous
Hunchback
actor
of Notre Dame.
and Captain Blythe.
Yes.
And that this was his only
Yes.
directing credit, writing credit, and that we're going to talk about it too. But that the
Yeah.
film got kind of maligned by critics for being too artsy.
Mm-hmm.
And after doing some research, after seeing the film, I was prompted to go right back and watch it all over again
Right.
through that lens. Like,
Right.
oh, an actor, especially a
Right.
famous stage actor, wrote and directed this
Right.
and got accused of being too artsy. What was so artsy? And it gave me a perspective into what was happening in 1955, that they would have thought this was going too far into the abstract or expressionist.
Oh, so much. Yeah. That's a conversation I can't wait to have. But
Right.
yes.
And then after that is 2015's Montage of Heck by Brett Morgen, a documentary about Nirvana and specifically Kurt Cobain. And then another documentary, one that completely caught me off guard, and I was very delighted by it.
Yeah.
It's nothing I would have found on my own, so thank you.
I was glad you'd never seen that before.
Yeah, it's 2004's In the Realms of the Unreal, directed by Jessica Yu.
Yeah.
So going start to finish, I asked you like what order you would show these in, and that's the order you thought would be best to present these stories. Can you explain like where the narrative overall or the idea overall starts and then progresses through these films?
Narrative overall is a little tricky.
Or the theme overall.
Yeah, they speak to me very deeply, I think, which is like I, Tonya, so I'm native to the Northwest, native to Battleground specifically, which is where Tonya Harding lives.
Oh.
And my mom taught her son in first grade.
Oh.
And my second boyfriend saw her get into a bar fight in Vancouver, Washington. And like, there's a place we would go camping where every time I'd go camping with a new person, they'd always say, you know, Tonya Harding lives here. So it was a weird...
What is the prompt to tell your date that?
I wouldn't say it. They would say it. We would all kind
yeah.
of whisper it to each other.
Oh.
Because, like, there aren't a lot of famous people out of Portland. Okay. Arguably, like, the most famous one we've got is Elliott Smith, and most people don't even know who he is when I bring him up.
Right.
So, like, Tonya Harding was kind of our celebrity for my childhood and young adulthood. And the thing that really stands out to me about that most is, like, I know a lot of people like that. Mm-hmm. Those were the people that I knew growing up. And so the film itself walks this really frustrating / fascinating line for me, because like they get parts right so perfectly right. Mm-hmm. They get the abuse right, the way that the moms are. That's exactly how they are. They get a lot of the poverty stuff, a lot of the rough and tumble stuff. When she makes a coat out of squirrels, like I knew people who did that.
Yeah,
you know. But on the other hand, they had to shoot in Georgia. And it looks like Georgia. It does not look like the Northwest. Their houses are too big and too nice. These people live in trailers.
Right.
That's where they actually live. And so they also had a dialect coach who made weird choices. Northwest accents don't sound like that sometimes. So like Margot Robbie's, she's Australian, I think.
Yes, she is.
Yeah, so she's making choices according to the dialect coach, and so is Sebastian Stan. And I'm like, nobody talks like that.
And from like in the credits of the movie, they have some clips, the actual footage of the real people that they recreated in the movie, and I noticed that the real
Jeff Gillespie.
Yes,
Yeah,
I noticed that Sebastian Stan's portrayal of Jeff Gillespie was an attempt to really sound like Jeff Gillespie's real voice.
I totally believe
So
that.
I could hear the effort there, that regardless of accent or regionality or anything, he was trying to hit just that slightly high pitched, slightly friendly neighborhood kind of guy.
There's a side conversation that we can have about him really quick.
Okay. Cut.
Nope, we're going to have a side conversation, and it's going to be a good one. Winter Soldier tattoo.
Yes, I see on your shoulder.
Yeah, would you like the story of why I have a tattoo of the Winter Soldier?
Yes, please tell me the story of your Winter Soldier tattoo.
And this is part of why I, Tonya became a comfort watch to me, is I'd seen I, Tonya for all the reasons that I already listed, because like I knew... Like, this is somebody talking about the Northwest. I like to watch every film that talks about it because I've been obsessed about it for forever, trying to turn it into a narrative. So it was always interesting to see people's viewpoint on that. But then I burned out 2019 in filmmaking, so I just took a year off and did all the sorts of things I'd been too snobby as a filmmaker to do, like watch all of the Marvel movies. And then when I got to... I have a really good reason for this, too, by the way.
Some of those movies... are really good, and I understand the overall hate of too much, too fast.
Yeah.
The interwoven stories after a while become burdensome on a viewer.
Yeah, it's not so much that from a filmmaking perspective as like, we'll talk about this more when we get to Eternal Sunshine. Movies like Eternal Sunshine don't get made anymore, in part because movies like Marvel movies are made more often.
Yeah.
They suck up all the money
and that's a shame.
And all the resources, and that's anybody interesting immediately gets siphoned off.
Well, as Everything Everywhere All at Once proved, we need to do more movies like those.
Yes, yeah. And the Russos
they shine
have
out when they do come out.
Yeah, the Russos have. They've produced a lot of people like that, including one of the fellas that I produced his first short film. So the Russos, to their credit, I think they realized that their career was a fluke. They got very, very lucky because Soderbergh saw their film completely randomly on a whim, and they didn't even have rights for the music they were using. And Soderbergh's like, he calls up George Clooney, and he's like, hey, George, these guys really have something. You want to make a movie with them? They make a movie. It's a total flop.
What movie was that?
Welcome to Collingwood, I think is what it's called.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And then they go on to do TV, and it's only when they do Community and there's Community episodes where it's like, oh, hey, other people can see that these guys have a thing, but they got tons and tons of chances until then. And it's been very clear from their approach because they produce a lot of indie filmmakers. I'm getting very sidetracked from the I, Tonya stuff, so I promise I'll loop it back around to the thing. But the Russos are everywhere in indie film. They are constantly looking at people doing movies made for nothing. And if they find somebody that they like, they put money in. And that is a rare thing and a wonderful thing because they don't have to do that. So to track back around to the Sebastian Stan thing, I saw Winter Soldier, realized I had a crazy amount of connections, not just with the film itself, like people on walk-on rules had worked with people that I knew up here. Like it was really bizarre and kind of freaked me out. And then I realized that not only had I seen over and over Sebastian Stan, I'd seen him in I, Tonya a million times and never put together that he was also the Winter Soldier.
Oh, that's a compliment to any actor.
It is very much so.
You do two different roles and really distinguish them enough that people might not recognize you each time.
He works a lot like some of my favorite actors that I've gotten to work with, and and then the more that I dug into him, the more that I'm like, this. I've been writing a character over and over in my grunge film that I had tried to get off the ground. That would have slotted perfectly into what Sebastian Stan does. But like, here is this guy who would have gotten my way of working. I would have gotten his way of working. We would have kicked ass together. And this role that I could not cast for the life of me while I was trying to get the film made was right there the whole time.
Oh, man.
So I got the tattoo in part to remind myself, like, my instincts are good. Even if my timing sucks, like, I just have to keep going. And I got to keep pressing through until I finally get something made.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I like that. That's very significant.
Yeah, so that's another reason that Tonya is a comfort watch, because it's like, here is this person who is, I have an actor friend in LA who works identically. And it is so much fun to work with him because he will do that sort of treading into method acting thing where it's not full on Daniel Day-Lewis looking at a penny when you're going to play Abraham Lincoln kind of a thing. Sure. It's more just like the sheer intensity and dedication of the thing. And it translates to like the weird intensity and edginess of the performance. So yeah, absolutely adore. And I miss that. Directing actors like that. Ugh. Heroin, put it in my veins. It is addicting, and it makes me feel absolutely incredible. So yeah,
I know from the acting I've done, and like, moving on to the next movie, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, watching a lot of behind the scenes interviews with Kate Winslet and Jim Carrey. Both of them were so excited and so enthusiastic to have a script like that to work on. The creativity, the imagination, where it wasn't so much about just reenacting this dramatic scenario, this relationship all over again, but plunging into, albeit a fantasy, albeit the abstract, something even deeper and richer than most other movies. And as you said, movies like that just don't get made anymore. And I countered with Everything Everywhere All at Once, but you're right, it is rare, the span in between those two movies, and looking for something similar.
But that's why I bring up the Russo brothers before. Was the only reason Everything Everywhere exists is because the Russos funded it.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, Focus Features was a whole subsidiary. They'd fund stuff, they'd put it out there. That stuff doesn't exist anymore.
Oh, wow.
And that's something I love about Eternal Sunshine. If you go back and you read the original script.
Wait, did you say Focus Features doesn't exist anymore?
It doesn't exist in the way that it was funding, and also the pipeline for distribution.
I have a small bit of trivia that I just found out today. Random thing I saw on Instagram. They're doing a Pharrell Williams biopic, and it's done all in Lego. Like the Lego movie and Lego Batman.
Okay.
After they did 2 Lego movies, I kind of said to myself, I love Lego so much, and both of those movies meant a lot to me as a Lego nerd from when I was a kid. I would like to see more of this, but I really don't see a reason to do it.
It's
they tried
kind
to
of
do
like,
the Ninjago, one of their other toy lines, and it was unnecessary. But this is like, okay, if it's just a style now, if it becomes just another way to make movies, another animation style, I can go with that. Tell me all kinds of stories, and tell me a serious biopic about a famous musician, and not some kid's story or some adventure story or a fictional thing.
Exactly. Try something new. Try something interesting.
Yeah.
That's part of what I loved about Eternal Sunshine. It's the only movie that I saw more than once in theaters aside from Lord of the Rings. And it's not surprising. I know a lot of people did that, but I saw each Lord of the Rings like 5 times. But I went back and I saw Eternal Sunshine for a different reason, although ultimately similar at the end of the day, which is the aesthetic, the visual aesthetic, the style, the sort of dreamy beauty of it, you know?
That was one thing I got from it right from the start that I didn't think anybody else would specifically get, and that I appreciated so much some artists bringing to the screen. Honestly, when I dream, I see everything kind of like there's a spotlight or a flashlight where everything is particularly dark around the edges.
Yes.
And I don't know, I've never spoken with anybody who said that that's also how they see things in their dreams. But I had recognized that about my dreams before this movie came out. And then seeing it on the screen, I went, oh, that's real.
Yeah.
That's exactly how my brain works.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's partly what I love about it is just I've done it a lot now, but back when it first came out 20 years ago, oh my God, it's 20 years old this year. Back when it first came out, it was very much just me rewatching it over and over being like, oh my God, how did they do that? I want to do that.
Right. And some of the transitions, when I was rewatching it for this, I was noticing that it looks exactly like AI animations where images are getting blurred together and morphing into one another.
But it was all practical effects for the most part.
Right. And simple in-camera trickery.
Yeah, like there's one where he's dragging Clementine through Dr. Mierzwiak's office, and then the camera spins around and shows him also sitting in the chair at the same time. And that's literally just him with a hat on, taking the hat off, mussing his hair up, and running around to the other side of the camera.
Yeah.
And I love that. Like, that's exactly the sort of practical effects I was super addicted to.
A little forced perspective.
Forced perspective when
kid
under the table.
in his mom's kitchen. The prop work, all the set design, making everything feel abnormal and feel exaggerated in its dimensions here and there. Really
beautiful.
Oh man!
And just there's
and so unnecessary. When you're talking about two producers to people who are looking at the budget, saying why would we make a point of doing really ridiculous things and making this feel so otherworldly and abstract, when you could just represent it in dialogue, or we could
CGI
it or something.
Yeah, and this is actually the same point that I was headed towards, because I would quote a Christopher Nolan interview all the time. He was talking about making Interstellar, and he said the reason that he insisted on practical effects for that is that you really can feel it in your bones when you're looking at a real thing.
Yeah.
Even if it's a real thing that's been messed with, or like the shot is comped together, like multiple elements all together in one shot, it still feels real. It has a weight to it. And that was an argument that I would make with producers all the time, because I was an idiot and often started out my scripts that I was trying to get funded with a lot of practical effects and a lot of difficult shots. And it would always be the question, why are we doing that? Because it looks cool, man.
I'm trying to imagine these days somebody trying to do a deep fake and put Jim Carrey's face on a baby, like in the baby bath in the kitchen sink scene, seeing full grown Jim Carrey in what must have been a massive.
And I bet that was so fun to do too.
Yeah.
Like I love that they built that out. They had, I think, what did they have, like a giant hand in there actually holding him?
They
if
had
I
forced
remember
perspective
right.
where an actress was standing very, very close to the camera,
Nice.
on a platform above them, so you could see her real face looking down at them, and it looked gigantic.
It did.
And then a giant prop hand reaching out to actually touch the real Jim Carrey and Kate Winslet.
Love. That's that ultimately, if I'd been able to build a sustainable film career, that's the stuff that I would have been aiming for all the time.
I found that movie incredibly impactful. I think I've seen it more than 10 times, just for sheer enjoyment. And coming back to it, I was caught off guard by the deep cast list. It's like, there's so many people that you would not have been clocking at the time.
Yeah.
That were in it. I was like, oh, that's
Mark Ruffalo, Kirsten Dunst.
Mark Ruffalo was the one that really caught
Elijah
me off guard.
Wood
He's such
in
a
there.
nerd. He's a forgettable character.
Yeah, because he hadn't really, his career was such tiny movies at that point. I think he'd done You Count on Me and a couple of other things, but not a lot. David Cross.
Yeah.
As Joel's friend.
Why is David Cross in this movie?
Oh.
That happens to be one of my favorite things, and kind of what also prompts me to do this particular podcast in this way, is finding connections of, there's these actors who had so many minor roles in so many movies for so long before they kind of made their breakthrough movie, and going back and watching kind of their minor works and seeing you get a really eclectic list of weird things. David Cross is one of those people who pops up in the most random titles.
Yeah, usually it's a combination. I mean, I can't speak to David Cross specifically, but when you get people like that popping up in movie after movie in tiny roles, it's because they have an agent that is paired with whatever other actor who is already getting hired on. So the agent's like, this guy is really going to be something. You should probably find one of the smaller roles for him.
Yeah.
I would get agents angling for that all the time, and I was nothing. I wasn't really a big filmmaker, so And there's that, and then there's also guys like that, I think, like to work in unusual places. They like to pick unusual things. So if you run that by somebody like that, they're probably going to say yes.
Yeah.
Which is fun. David Cross Film Fest coming up.
There should be a David Cross Film Fest.
That would be a very fun one to put together. I want to, when we get to the end of this, I want to ask you about your picked 5 favorites.
That's going to be the next episode, and
that's what I was hoping.
I had a lot of fun putting that together.
Yeah.
The next movie we're going to talk about is Night of the Hunter.
Yes.
Starring Robert Mitchum, who I only ever knew as a singer.
Really?
When he came on screen for this one, I was confused for a second because I know this guy. The album I know him most from is Calypso Is Like So, where he covers a lot of Calypso
music?
Yeah.
Are you for real?
He was basically trying to ride the coattails of Harry Belafonte.
Are you for real?
I could... Hold on. Yeah, Robert Mitchum.
So Robert Mitchum sang Calypso, which is bonkers because he's also the guy that I know from 3 Things, which is Cape Fear, where he's a rapist. Here, where he's a murderer, and Dead Man with Johnny Depp, which was his last role.
Oh, cool. Okay. Nice.
Yeah.
No, Night of the Hunter. Okay. It's all about movies that were close to your heart. So
yes.
I really want to hear. This was the one I actually wanted to hear the most, hear your side first, the most about what was important to you about it.
There's a connecting thread between this and Eternal Sunshine in that the first time that I ever saw it, it left this massive scar visually, particularly in 2 sequences that I know he got a lot of flack for both, which is crazy to me. But the sequence where Harry Powell sort of stands in the bedroom in the light, and it's all this big shadowy triangle, and Shelley Winters is in bed saying, "You couldn't possibly have married me for the money that couldn't possibly be," and then he raises the knife over her, and then it cuts to her underwater with her hair flowing, already dead. And
I'm sorry. I'm holding my breath, waiting for you to say where they thought Charles Laughton needed to take flack for that. That was
Robert
gorgeous.
Mitchum gave him flack for that. He gave him flack for that and for the river sequence as well.
That was the other one I thought you were going to say. And I will admit, when I went back and watched it the second time, knowing the criticism, I was able to take in better the symbolism and the importance of that scene and how eerie it was having the singer singing over the little girl in the boat. Yeah,
it blows my mind that anybody disliked that, because to me, I feel like I've spent my entire life trying to narratively achieve the thing that I felt watching her hair flow in the current while he sings leaning over the top, and then it's just this slow fade to like him leaning against the tree and going, "Children." And you just feel like a genuine thrill of fear when you look at it, like these 2 little kids are all alone with him, you know? Like, I love that. And then the river sequence, it's a little more abstract, so I get why people, especially in the 50s, there weren't a lot of sequences like that back then. But I think that's part of what makes it ageless, is like those tiny little helpless creatures hiding out as the 2 little kids who are also tiny helpless creatures hide out. And the movie illustrates it once again much later, right after the woman in the house has had the duet with Harry Powell.
Yeah.
And there's a owl up in a tree, and it looks down at a mouse, I think, or a bunny on the ground. And then it swoops down and grabs it up off screen. And you see the woman go, "It's a hard world for little things." So it makes the theme of the film very, very clear in this way that gives me chills no matter how many times I see it. And I wasn't the only one. The reason that I watched it the first time was I was a huge fan of Raising Arizona.
Okay.
And there's a sequence in Raising Arizona where Nicolas Cage has that nightmare. I don't know how well you remember it.
I honestly don't. It's going on my list right now.
Oh my God, you should watch. It's fantastic. It's the Coen brothers at their craziest. But There's also this wonderful sequence that's bizarrely sad, where he has a nightmare. He wakes up, Holly Hunter is walking back and forth singing a folk song to a baby. And then Nicolas Cage gets up and looks out the window and he says, "It's a hard world for little things." And that's a tribute to Night of the Hunter.
Wow.
And then they cut to like this huge sun setting in Raising Arizona and the sound of a baby crying. And it evokes that exact same feeling in me, which is sort of horrified sorrow, I think.
Yeah. Oh, is it like the empathizing with and also fearing for the helplessness of small children?
The helplessness, but also the epic beauty of the thing kind of contributes to that sort of awe-inspiring feeling. There's a little spider skittering across the table. He's a tiny little guy, which is a perfect theme for what we're talking about right now.
It's a big table.
Can't even see his legs. He's so tiny.
On the river scene,
Oh God!
I did not catch it the first time, but then going back, it was singing about helpless little fly,
Yeah.
and then sort of transposed over the children in the boat are close-ups of things that are predators to flies, and basically illustrating that they were, instead of having them go on this epic journey walking through the South and showing them in all these different scenarios, it sort of summed up time passing and their struggle to get from home out on their own, being like 8 and
10, I think, ish.
Yeah.
Around there. 8, 12, maybe.
And so figuratively passing past dangers that a fly would pass through, like frogs and spiders. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that so much. And I love on top of it, like just the sheer, it's set in the Great Depression, which if you're filming in 55, that would have been 20 years ago. So it would have
Still
been
very familiar to
depression
parents.
for that. Yeah, like it would have been absolutely, I think, cathartic to watch that. Like you don't see a lot of films come out about the Great Depression after the Great Depression's over. But
and they made it poignant scenes like after they get out of the boat, they do have a real encounter with somebody. They just walk up to this woman's house and she's like, "Oh no, 2 more. I guess I can only give you 1 potato each." And the idea that was the
So
environment,
common.
that this poverty was everywhere, and that people were expecting travelers or children, parentless children, to just show up in need, but also were so traumatized or so pressed themselves that they're like, "I will give you a potato, but then you have to go because that's honestly
all I got.
Cannot be giving everyone potatoes."
Yeah.
Or more than just a potato.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is, I love that a lot. I love too there's frank sex talk to a degree that's very surprising for a film in the 50s. Like she, on their wedding night, Shelley Winters and Harry Powell.
I do beg your pardon. I was trying to remember which character was Frank. But yes, there was...
No wonder you look confused.
Right. There is his name's Harry. And the boy's not named Frank.
Icy Spoon and Walt Spoon, those two churchy people who I wanted to talk about.
Now there's a name.
Icy Spoon's
There's a name.
and an atrocious person, but like atrocious in a very practical way. I think we all know somebody like that.
She drove. I was going to ask you about the misogyny of this movie and why this movie
I
front
love
to
it
back
because,
hates women.
Yes, it recognizes the hate. I think it recognizes that what was done to her is wrong. But like Icy is a fucking asshole, and like that reinforcement of like, you don't want a woman who wants that.
No,
I don't want that. I lie there thinking about my canning. And then the
Yes.
little visual gag of her husband just like putting his brownie down in disgust makes me laugh every time, because it's like, yeah, probably that's awful. Well, that's a terrible way to live.
And the same thing after Harry comes back to the bakery, after we see that Shelley Winters has been killed and is in the river, he goes in and lies about her having run off. And oh, what a loose woman. She found
Yes.
some drummer, took off. And Icy just eats that up.
She
and
eats
knows it as gospel truth, not just because a preacher is telling her that, but because women just can't be trusted.
That's it.
Like, what is this messaging?
Yeah, the movie very much, I think, illustrates Icy as like the bad kind of Christian. And I think it reinforces that later when...
I mean, does it?
I think so, because Lillian Gish comes in later, and she is also very heavily Christian. We've got Harry Powell, we've got Icy Spoon, and we've got Lillian Gish.
Lillian Gish, I didn't notice her character being much different.
She
was more compassionate to Ruby.
She takes them in. But yeah, there's definitely some, I will totally not argue with you there. There is definitely some old school misogyny in there, but I think to a degree that you can't escape from the 50s.
Okay, I'll give you that they are, if that's the narrow spectrum within overall patriarchal misogyny, then yes, Icy is the worst, and
because
Lillian Gish is the better one of the two.
There's like the sequence where the young girl that Lillian Gish is taking care of is going out and hanging out with men.
Yeah.
And they go, preacher, when the preacher comes up, because they're implying like, oh, really, a preacher's going to buy like sex from this young kid? Like, they're saying it as much as they can say it in the 50s with the Hays Code. Right. But when she goes up to Lillian Gish after and she says, I've done this terrible thing, I've been with men, and Lillian Gish is immediately forgiving and nice about it.
She was nice about
I do think you watch a lot of movies from the 50s, there is not that level of compassion. So,
and at the same time, when they first go to market with all their apples, there's one of the little girls that Lillian Gish is taking care of.
Yeah.
A woman just runs up and hugs her. Apparently it's her mom. And just says, oh, hi, good to see you. I'll see you in a couple of days, and then runs off again. And I thought everybody was an orphan or everybody was lost.
Yeah.
And I did not understand that this little girl had a mom who I guess was just working
out
so
of wedlock,
much.
Probably.
Okay.
That's what I assume. I mean, they would institutionalize women back then too for having kids out of wedlock. So,
but didn't Lillian Gish's character then say, "Oh, there she goes again. I'll probably have a new one to take care of soon enough."
Yeah.
In a matter-of-fact, kind of judgy way.
Yeah, but I think that's also, I mean, this is a whole side conversation that we could have that I find really fascinating, actually.
Please, yeah.
Because a lot of, especially 70s feminists will argue that the misogyny started to get more and more tackleable after we got the pill. So this is pre-pill times where condoms weren't even really a thing.
Right.
People were just doing it bareback. And within that, there were a lot of people having a lot of kids that they didn't have the ability to take care of. I mean, that's always happened throughout human history. But once women had the ability to take the pill and still live the way that they wanted to live, I think you saw a lot less of that kind of talk from otherwise sympathetically posed people. There's no way that a movie from the 50s is going to age perfectly. I
was particularly fascinated. I was entertained. I loved Robert Mitchum's performance, but fascinated as I guess I had a lot of expectations from other movies I've seen from that period of sort of a stoicness amongst men, of the idea that if he was going to be a villain, he would be much cooler and much more menacing most of the time.
Yeah.
Overall, his character was tuned to be a minister of the children. The children turn out to be the main heroes, and so he is the kind of villain that can be outrun by children, that can have a shelf of jars and cans dropped on his head, and he's less capable than like a villain from an action movie.
Yeah. That's something that I really love about him, when they drop that jar of cans on his head and he kind of groans.
Well, then he gets like a high-pitched scream and he gets so exaggeratedly upset.
It's like undignified in a surprising way, but it makes him feel more human too somehow. You know, like that's what would happen if you had a jar of cans and peaches dropped on your head. Yeah, that's part of what's interesting too about it, is like Shelley Winters and Lillian Gish over there are doing the old school silent film exaggerated kind of approach to acting, and
he's sauntering in with a lyrical way of talking,
and he's doing it, but he also, like, he'll do little side glances and like little subtle things. So he's sort of blending the old and the new styles that were going on at the time.
He does create a really unstable character. He is reacting in a psychotic way.
Yeah, the symbolism of it, I accidentally makes me laugh a few times too. Like in the very, very beginning when he goes to see the burlesque show, he's got he's got the knife in his pocket, and like he flicks the knife open, and it's like, all right, that's
and
a little
pokes
too
through
on
through his coat. Yeah.
Usually when I give the movie to people, I'm like, please just stick it out past the initial part, because it does feel a little awkward in the beginning, because it does have things like that, but it picks up after a little while.
I was the second time I was watching it, I kept thinking, if anyone ever remade this, they would spend so much time with someone finding his diary, or someone somehow getting him to do more exposition about his thought process. And in this one, we just get to see him be himself.
Yep. He says he hates lacy things with curly hair. That's it. That's the motivation. And money. Yeah. Money's nice. So that's it.
And that it's right for him to go around doing God's work, punishing women and taking their money.
Yeah, exactly.
Ugh. It was a weird watch for that reason.
Yeah, it's it's deeply inspiring despite all of its flaws, and it's got some for sure. But the parts that work so well. I hope someday I can make a sequence that makes me feel like that.
Oh yeah, I would definitely recommend this to more people to watch. For sure.
For sure.
There's something in them.
I love that too.
That made it very special. The next movie is
Montage of Heck.
Yes! This was fun. I realized how much I did not know about Nirvana. I will admit, I grew up in Kansas. I was in high school in the late 90s. And I didn't quite get into Nirvana specifically. I liked the hits that came out, but I wasn't a fan dedicated to finding out more about them. I didn't have every album. I was more into 311.
I don't think that's a good. I mean, same. I don't think that I would have been to the degree that I became over the course of my now at this point life if I didn't grow up around Portland, because Portland was actually very, very jealous of what was going on in Seattle at the time.
Oh, really?
So you'd read through the Oregonian.
It felt more accessible. It could have been us.
Pretty much.
Just 3 hours away.
Pretty much. And I mean, the Seattle guys would come down here and be like, here's the real punk guys. This is who you should be paying attention to. And you can go in the Central Library downtown Portland right now and see a display of all the punk bands from the 70s and 80s around here that were influential to those guys up in Seattle. But it took off in Seattle and not so much here. And there's a bunch of reasons for that I'm working into the video game that I'm writing right now. But
awesome.
A lot of it has to do with Seattle is okay making money and Portland isn't. That sort of punk sensibility stuck here, where it's okay to do DIY stuff like this. You'd have a hard time finding people who would be cool doing this up there. So it's always been more of a workers' town, and it just happened to have this crazy fluke out of nowhere, Kurt specifically, that crystallized this moment. And it's something like Montage of Heck is really tricky for the same reason that reading through his journals is very tricky, because I feel like I'm getting such insight into a person. It almost feels like violation. I don't think it actually wound up in the movie, but there's a sequence where Courtney is in their LA house filming him as he lays sick in bed, and then she does a close-up of his puke bucket.
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah, I think that was one of the scenes that they cut for being a little too graphic. Yeah. But you can find it on YouTube, and it's just a lot of the clips that are in the film are like that too, where it's like you're just watching two people have very intimate moments that feel uncomfortable to a point. And that's kind of, I think, Kurt Cobain in a nutshell, that lack of filter, that perpetual vulnerability, and that artist brain.
Yeah.
I had...
having a lot to say and not distinguishing what will move my career forward or what will be appealing to folks. No, it's just something I really need to say, something I've seen or a phrase, an image that I want to recreate and put into the world. Yeah, and there are two things here that I really, really want to say, because this is such a fascinating subject to me, but I had the sheer luck of moving up to Seattle to make a film about the grunge era the same month that Montage of Heck debuted. So Brett Morgan was there giving a talk,
And he said in his talk, there's never been another artist like Kurt Cobain. And I found myself disagreeing, actually, because I've known a lot of guys like that. It's just that a lot of those guys never get famous because they don't have the capacity to get famous. It's not really in their bones to do so. And if you rewind pre-91 when Nevermind hits and you go back to interviews with all of these guys who got famous in the 80s instead, none of them thought that Kurt Cobain would be anything. They all figured that he would be yet another very sensitive burnout kid. And you can kind of see it. Like, I know guys like that. I know guys like that who live around here and they're homeless right now. Because, like, that's usually where those guys go, you know? So the contrast between that and, like, Kurt's main biographer, Charles Cross, has said a few times, he said, like, Kurt could not have gotten famous any later. If he got famous in the internet age, he would not have lasted.
Yes.
There was...
He would have demanded so much more. It would have been so much more invasive.
So much more invasive. And on top of it, that guy was not good about censoring himself.
Yeah.
If he had an emotion, it was coming out. And a lot of the time, I mean, there was that article that was written about them in Variety that got their Frances, their daughter, taken away for a while.
Yeah, yeah.
And while that happened, Kurt Cobain was literally calling up the journalist who wrote the article and threatening her life. Like, that's not a thing that a star gets to do now.
Right.
You know?
Right.
That's not a thing that you're allowed to do. But back then, everything was still loose enough. So, yeah, it's a haunting film to me, I think, because so much of it is recognizable in people that I knew growing up. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, it's like there are a lot of things it feels like it can't quite say because the material isn't really there to say it.
Well, honestly, because I felt it was very raw and showed a lot of some of the excerpts from his diary. One thing I loved was the illustrations.
Yeah.
The animated illustrations of passages from his diary.
Which were so wonderfully graphic and bizarre. Yeah.
But those also mixed, he was... born late enough that there was a lot of home movies and a lot of actual candid footage to illustrate these things as well. Mm-hmm. And getting to hear about him in high school, his high school experience, getting to hear about him as a very young man from in his own words and his own admissions. And
this is an interesting sequence as well because a lot of those spoken word pieces that they animated in the movie probably didn't happen. So he had a tendency, and I spent a long time puzzling around this because the very first Nirvana book about Nirvana was written by this very gullible journalist who was kind of just absolutely taking in every story that Kurt Cobain would say. So he would say wilder and wilder stories, and you get halfway through the book and you're like, this is all bullshit. All of this is bullshit. And like the reason that Charles Cross is considered the preeminent Kurt Cobain biographer is that he went through all of Kurt's actual history and was like, so he says he slept under this bridge, but this bridge floods actually. He couldn't possibly have slept under it. Like story after story after story where Kurt was building up his own myth.
Okay.
And it was all bullshit. And Mark Maron did an interview with Courtney Love recently, and he asked her about that. Uh-huh. And Courtney Love finally articulated what's always puzzled me about it. She said, lying to the press is one of the greatest joys in life. So like just making stuff up was a way for because so most of those stories, who knows how much was real. And that, to me, that like encapsulates the guy. He wanted love and he wanted a family and he wanted all that support, and then he'd consistently push it away and make it hard. The interview with his dad is really fascinating too because he looks so uncomfortable.
Oh yeah,
he did not want to be there.
I felt I was in the room when Kurt Cobain's stepmother is the one doing all the talking, sitting next to his dad, and his dad's
just like his hands flexing they on the
did
chair.
Close up of his hands like twitching or patting nervously.
What the documentary doesn't cover, Don Cobain would hit Kurt and would do like this at his chest, like thump him in the chest. and like lecture him, yell at him, tried to make him go into the army because he dropped out of high school. Like
Right.
a bunch of pretty basic like Gen Xer stuff that they went through when they hated their parents. So yeah, I mean it's fascinating to see that, and then the contrast between that and like Wendy Cobain, who looks identical to Courtney Love. And it strikes me over and over in that film, and I've never seen it drawn so perfectly, and I'm pretty sure Brett Morgen did it on purpose. That Kurt Cobain married his mom. That's pretty much exactly why he was so strongly attracted to Courtney in the first place, I think. Is like, Wendy, that's Wendy. She's full of shit, she's self-aggrandizing, she causes a lot of trouble, she's a pain in the ass.
I was drawing a lot of parallels between Kurt Cobain and Tonya Harding.
How so?
Somebody who was really misunderstood, somebody who was kind of being pushed to approach their art, their talent, in a way that conformed to other people's standards.
Yeah.
And people saying, no, the figure skating can't be done unless you're upholding this outdated, and tying back to Night of the Hunter too, this outdated, sort of overly chaste, overly objectifiable Barbie princess image that the figure skating committee wants. Kurt Cobain being alternative punk, grunge,
Very
rocker,
much
and
punk.
everyone's saying, hey, no, there's a formula for that we need you to fit into to be a rocker. He's like, I'm breaking barriers. Like, yeah. This is how we want you to break barriers. This is how we want you to still approach us and give us things that we can make money off of you.
Yeah.
It's not about, none of this has ever been about you or the music.
Yep.
That's where I saw the line there.
Yeah, I think that's something particularly Northwesty, at least it was when I was growing up, and it's something that's in my bones at this point. So at the end of the day, I love that there are stories about these people who still got to do interesting things and still had plenty of talent, even though they did not at all fit into the role that they were thrust into.
Yeah.
And it takes some persistence and some forward thrusters to still get through when you don't fit.
Fuck you-itude.
Pretty much.
To just go ahead with
Pretty much.
being yourself.
Yeah. And like making the art you want to make, you know.
And even Kurt Cobain almost like you were saying, fucking with the press, ignoring the press, trying to duck out of interviews, being very uncooperative, almost trying to self-sabotage professionally.
Very much.
In an effort just to do what he wanted to do, just to fucking play the music. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then still they ate that up. And like, we could totally market. The more he hates us, the more we can sell stories about him hating us.
Yeah, which is just, there's a whole very complicated thing that I've worked out in the grunge game about that constant contradictory thing, because Kurt was not the only one walking that line. He was just kind of the one at the center of it. Yeah. But yeah, theoretically, if I get famous, I'll fuck off into the woods like Bill Watterson. That's what I'll do. In a perfect world, I never get famous, but I get to make everything I want to do anyway. Yeah. And I think I figured it out, finally. Because I was not able to do that in movies.
Oh, no.
Not at all.
What is... this is a side conversation. What is the solution you figured out?
Make games. Nobody gives a shit.
Oh, okay.
Like, you can talk to a lot of game devs, and they're like, yeah, I've been working on this game for like 7 years straight, and I learned all of these disciplines, and I now have a 50-minute demo that you can play. Mm-hmm. And I made this a huge labor of love, and I'm just going to put it out there, and 5 people play it, and thank you. That's good enough for me. On I go. Because the making of the thing seems to be more of the goal there.
Yeah.
Let's just have a little joy, you know? Let's just make a thing because it's fun to make the thing. I think that's where the really good stuff comes from, which segues really nicely into our last movie.
It does, for independent outsider artists, someone who isn't even known artistically until after their death. Yeah,
which just, So there are times when I kind of think I might wind up being like a Henry Darger type. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I find that encouraging, actually. And other times I don't.
I mean, to be so prolific, to be so driven, I would love to ride that
1,500
wave.
pages and then 300 drawings. And they finally put the whole thing out on the internet. So, like,
oh, really?
Illinois has archives that have turned his entire thing into a scanned PDF. Because apparently most of it is not meant to be read by, he didn't think anybody would care. So he didn't make it readable. Really, like it falls apart very easily. So people can't actually go and look at it, but they scan the whole thing. And it's exactly like what the documentary makes it feel like, a lot of very daring battles. And
that's in the realms of the unreal.
In the realms of the unreal. Mm-hmm.
Oh my goodness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's a lot that I love about that documentary. One of the things is the compassion that Jessica Yu has for him, because you can find a lot of other alternative tackles on Henry Darger, trying to figure him out, and a lot of them treat him like he's an idiot. And it's kind of difficult to take. I mean, the man's art was gorgeous, and he clearly had a lot going on upstairs, but it sounds like a lot of people were dismissive of him when he was...
Yeah.
Which is interesting to me. I think some of the better artists that I've known are too internal. They're so internal you can't really connect with them because it's all up here all the time. And in the documentary, when his neighbors talk about like hearing him do voices, and their theory is that he's working through stuff that happened earlier in his life.
Right.
But I also wouldn't be surprised if he was working through scenes in the stories that he was writing and doing the different voices and just like writing it out. Because it seems like a lot of his real life gets worked out in fiction. He's saving the kid that he was, that nobody came to save him, I think part of what speaks to me about the doc personally, though, is like I was a much weirder artist when I was younger and almost impossible to approach, and I wrote 7 novels before I was 18.
Oh, wow.
And I wrote hundreds and hundreds of poems, like dozens of short stories. Like I was a whirling dervish of writing, but I was also impossible to connect with as a person. And it took me a long time to be able to figure out how to balance this constant insane shit bouncing around in my head with the normal world where most people don't have that. And I think part of what
you just want to tell someone about, oh my goodness, I saw this really great crumpled up piece of paper, and it looked like something. It looked like a cap. I thought, what if there was a cat that was also somehow an octopus?
Yeah.
And then I went, this is the music it would make.
Yeah. See,
and someone stopped you at, you saw a crumpled up piece of paper and decided to make an art that's not related to the crumpled up piece of paper.
And how boring is that to live like that?
Yes.
Like I've learned to. This sounds terribly condescending, but yeah, I've learned to tamp that side of myself down, because most people just won't get it, and I'm sad for them that they don't.
No, I think it's fair to say it. We must pity the normal people. It sounds so condescending, so I apologize, but like also it's kind of true. Like it's like you're missing part of your brain. There's a whole ass world out there. Like I remember Community, the TV show, is really meaningful to me as well, and Abed for very similar reasons. That that hit too close to home.
But
it was like, what if everything I do is just a quote from a movie? I went, stop imitating my life.
He goes into the Dreamatorium, and he will have those big, long, imaginary moments, right? But like, I would go through and read what people had to say about it, and most of them were like, God, I wish I could do that. If I had that, I'd never want to get out of my head. And I'm like, yeah, it took me a long time to want to leave. Because you can imagine the world however you want it and put yourself in the middle of anything.
I can only imagine Henry Darger getting maybe a reprieve from being a hospital janitor, a reprieve from the health struggles he went through.
Yes.
Understanding that he had some mental problems, and working with people and knowing people in my life who are in a similar situation. Yeah, they are aware of that, and it sucks that way. But to be able to disappear for a few hours into a world of your own creation, a world where you feel safe, a world where you have such control, where you can cross lines just instinctively. Yes, there's not that filter imposed by yourself or by anyone else to keep you from being honest. Exactly. Oh man. Yeah, that's I think 2 directions on that. I see that really heavily, not just in the sheer dedication he had to that manuscript for so long, the size of the drawings, just all of that, but
him going through the trash to find right pieces for his art. Like all of that. That's the kind of thing you do when you don't have money.
The
you don't
desperate,
have
passionate
training.
pursuit to get it just right. Like, I will not let this out of my head into the world unless I'm doing it perfectly.
But that's the other side of it, is that it's clear he never thought anybody would care. And that's what breaks my heart the most, I think, about the documentary. I think it's toward the end when one of his neighbors goes to him when he's in the old folks' home and says, Henry, this is beautiful.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
Henry's
that
eyes,
made me cry a little bit.
Henry's eyes light up, and then he says, well, too late now. And that just, that breaks my heart for him, because I can imagine coming from the environment he came from, where he was in abusive situations and mostly orphaned for most of his life, and then just working one really lousy job. And that's it. That's his whole life. He had a friend, one friend. And then that friend moved away and he was alone. And that...
Oh, man, that's making me sad just remembering it. Everyone should see this documentary, though. Everyone should see In the Realms of the Unreal, but it's going to give you feels.
Yeah, this is one reason why he means so much to, I think, a lot of people now, is he took all of that and he did something with it, even when he thought nobody was listening. He made it for himself. And he really did make something beautiful. I got a giant print made, which I wish it could go to his estate. He doesn't have one, but you can go on Etsy and find people who've like blown them up into prints. And I had a giant print made of one of his pieces of one of the girls where she has wings behind her.
Oh, yeah.
And like a snaky creature along the bottom. It's one of my favorite pieces that he did. And I keep it up there in my apartment, and most people don't recognize it because most people don't know who he is. But I had my friend who ultimately went on to make films that are funded by the Russos. He was up here recording music for his film, and he needed a place to crash, so he crashed in my apartment. And he said, "Oh, you like Henry Darger too?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'd imagine this guy speaks to a lot of us who are weird ass artists at the end of the day." I know, I don't think this is in the documentary, but I know that on his grave it's inscribed "Defender and Protector of Children," which I think is beautiful.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Isn't it? Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, he didn't get what he should have gotten in life, but it's kind of turned him into a symbol for that kind of thing. So some days when I'm like, nobody gives a shit what I'm doing, nobody will ever watch it, I'll just go back and rewatch the documentary and be like, maybe that's okay.
I was thinking, because part of the whole premise of this podcast is a hypothetical film festival that you could potentially put on for other people.
Yeah.
And I was imagining if someone committed a day or a couple of days to watch these 5 movies straight through, the appeal coming in would be much like what I had was, I've seen Eternal Sunshine.
Yeah.
It's a great movie. I love it. I know Nirvana's music. It'll be fun to see more behind the scenes stuff about this, expecting that it's just going to be like touring videos or something, and then getting a richer story about Kurt Cobain's life. But to end on Realms of the Unreal, I do think it would be the most impacting of the 5.
I arranged it this way on purpose, in part because a lot of these other films have meaning for me. They're important for me, but I find Realms of the Unreal to be the most haunting, partly because I've been in the DIY art space my entire life. I plan on staying there till I'm dead, and so many Henry Dargers out there, right?
Right.
There's a likelihood that I might be one of them, and like I'm 50 years dead, and people start reprinting my fucking shit like they do with Kafka now. It's like they go through Kafka's diaries, and you'll see Kafka quotes, and it's like, most people didn't even read his stuff when he was alive. He asked for it to be burned. Like,
yep.
So,
same with Van Gogh, same with Lovecraft. Who's now everyone just
so
loves
it's like
the IP of Lovecraft.
Yeah. So hopefully I don't wind up in a Lovecraft space where it's like, God, that guy was a racist. Like, hopefully my work is a little bit more good than that, and like
I hope,
decent to people.
And tolerant and accepting.
But yeah, like it's, who knows? One thing I think that threads through most of these films, not all of them, is that contrast between being famous and not, and what does each one get you. And
Yeah.
for Tonya, it's about the skating. For Kurt, it's about the music. For Henry Darger, it was about this massive work he's putting out there, like getting to do the stuff that's close to your heart and that you feel like you're really good at, you know?
Yeah.
That's the best
That
thing in
means
the
the
world.
most.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Are we at the point where you can tell me your favorites? Because now I want to know.
Okay. Definitely not like my top 5, but the next
Films that are close to your heart. That's the theme.
films that are close to my heart. The next time we get together, the mini film festival that you'll get to enjoy in your time between now and when we record
Absolutely.
are Godspell from 1973.
I guess I shouldn't be surprised given that you have a theater background.
This is okay. I like that I'm going to get red a little bit as I read these. As I knew this would happen, and I'm fully confident in my choice of movies.
As you should be. This is not me ragging in a mean way. This is me like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I can see that.
Well, buckle up. Because the next one is from 1999. Eddie Izzard's stand routine from San Francisco.
Oh, hell yeah.
Dress to Kill.
Oh,
which
hell
is
yeah.
Very formative work for me. I had that memorized. I still have a lot of it memorized.
Is that the one with the cake or death routine in it?
Yes.
Yes.
As you get to know me, you'll find that sometimes when
I can see that.
when I'm crafting jokes, I will say things in a rhythm or a cadence that matches Eddie Izzard. Then after that, and then that kind of broke any sort of overall theme.
Good.
Tom Popo.
I've never seen that.
Yes.
My brother has said to me a million times, he said, you should watch Tom Popo. You'll love it. And I've never gotten around
one
to
of the
it.
greatest love letters to food appreciation, generally speaking, because it's about loving food, cherishing food, and appreciating it. But specifically ramen, and ramen's also one of my favorite foods, and one that deserves a lot of appreciation and has so much artistry and depth to it.
I love that you picked it off of that. That's fantastic to me.
I have a great listeners, you're gonna love it. I have a great story to go with the first time I saw Tom Popo.
Nice. Yes.
And no, I did not swap an egg yolk with a lovely lady in a theater.
This will make sense to me when I watch the movie, I think.
It's not a euphemism.
Oh, okay.
The next one from 2008 is Sita Sings the Blues.
I've
Do you know
never
this
seen
movie?
that.
Oh,
I do.
good, but you know it already.
Yeah, but it's one of those ones where you see critics rave about it and you're like, oh God, that's on the list. And then I haven't gotten around to it yet. So I really want to see that. It looked gorgeous, I remember.
Oh, it's absolutely beautiful.
Yeah.
And it's on Tubi right now.
Nice.
As
Awesome.
of this recording.
Sold.
And then the last one, the way I capped off the whole mini film fest, is from 2019, Booksmart.
Nice. That's a fun one.
Have you seen it?
I have.
Okay.
Yeah,
it's worth rewatching over and over and over again. It's, for me, it's very personal, that movie. In a lot
I
of
could
ways.
see that. I could see that.
I think that's a good place to stop. No, this is a lot of fun.
Yeah, hell yeah.
I'm so glad you said yes to doing this.
Yeah, me too. I was going to do it no matter what.
Hey, thank you.
Yeah, you bet, dude.
All right, let's cut it off there. we'll talk again next time.
That's a good spot.
With the films close to my heart. All right.
How I miss your ranting. Do you miss my all-time love?
Heroin. Put it in my veins.
Which is, by the way, is the sponsor of this episode, heroin.
As it should be.
Don't start your day without the horse. Nee!
Oh my God.
Heroin.